Thank you everyone for coming out this afternoon. We're the College of Education. We've been working on doing a couple of different um, symposiums for our different cultural heritage months. So May is actually Pacific, I can't talk today, Islander Heritage Month, and we are trying to get a couple things in before May, since I know that everyone will be doing their finals and getting ready to end the semester and graduating. Some of our folks will be graduating, right? So we're going to do a couple things at the end of April. I know the university as a whole is also doing some API events, so be sure to look out for those as well. So we have three speakers today, and what we're going to talk about, I'll introduce them a little bit and have them introduce themselves. But first, I wanted to give the dean of the college the opportunity to do a welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Robertson, and thanks to all of you for joining us this afternoon as we engage this so important topic. I was excited when I read this because this is not just discussion, this is research that these colleagues are trying to share with us. I would simply say we are not just doing this to celebrate Asia Pacific Islander Month. We're doing this because this nation is at a point where we need ongoing conversations about how we engage with one another. As many of you are aware, Asian Americans have experienced an increased racist treatment in the last 1 year. Since the pandemic. And I'm hoping that as we engage and discuss, we're able to better understand ourselves and better respect and appreciate our differences as well as our commonalities, and realize that we are intertwined in many ways. What affects one affects the other. So I want to thank Dr. Stacy Robertson and her office for helping organize this. And I want to thank our College of Education faculty members, Dr. Kim, and Dr. Young Wang, as well as our sister college, our natural science rep, Dr. Kim, for joining in this conversation. So I'm really appreciative of your willingness to come and grace this occasion for us. Thank you to my colleagues, and thanks to all who have come to participate. I hope you will benefit maximally from this. And I'm hoping that this is not just one shot and done, that we continue to have more engagements like this, but to celebrate our differences and commonalities, as well as engage in difficult conversations so we can better understand ourselves. Thank you, Dr. Robertson.
Thank you. So if our professors are ready, we can go ahead and have them introduce themselves and their research. One of the things I thought was interesting about this as well, our topic is looking at home languages for bilingual children with autism spectrum disorders. It covers information that our students in our college would be interested in. And I think that it works for various populations, right? So a lot of our students are bilingual with different home languages. So I thought that was important as well. So I'm going to turn it over to the speakers and have them introduce themselves and to do their research. We will have question and answers a little bit at the end, and there's also a chat function where we'll have a couple people monitoring that so that we can have some discussion after they're done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Then I'll start our presentation at the beginning. We'll have a chance to introduce ourselves briefly. So let me share the screen first. So welcome to our presentation, Family-Centered Practices for Korean Immigrant Mothers who have children with Autism Spectrum Disorder. I'm Gemma Kim, Associate Professor, Special Education, Rehabilitation and Counseling, College of Education. And
Yes. Hi, hello everybody. Young-Soo Kwang, professor, teacher education and foundation.
Hello, I am Yan Kim, a registered nurse and associate professor at nursing department in the College of Natural Science.
We are all first generation immigrant mothers with bilingual children. In particular, Dr. Young Kim and I have children with autism spectrum disorder and had the similar concerns and experience with the Korean mothers when we start intervention services and special education programs. From this presentation, you will have opportunities to hear Korean immigrant mothers' experience when they raising their children bilingually. And you will also learn how practitioners and professionals in early childhood special education program or early intervention can influence Korean mothers' decision making on their home language practices. And lastly, from our findings, we expect that practitioners can better understand why family-centered practice must be implemented when working with culturally and linguistically diverse families of young children with any kind of disabilities. Autism spectrum disorder, ASD, is a lifelong and pervasive developmental disorder characterized by impairments in social communication skills with repetitive behavior patterns. And in the United States, the prevalence of ASD noticeably increased to 1 in 56 children as of 2018. Another increasing trend in the United States is the population who speak a language other than English at home, which now account for 21.8% of the population. As ASD occurs in all racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic groups, we expect to observe more children with ASD from culturally and linguistically diverse, from now I'll indicate CLD, families who do not speak English at home. Therefore, educators and practitioners must be prepared to work with CLD families. Although the cause and its cure still under debate, early diagnosis and early intervention has been consistently recommended to address the core deficit in autism spectrum disorder. After initial diagnosis, children with ASD needs a range of medical, therapeutic services, including early intervention and intensive treatment. Thus, families will encounter various professionals across these service sectors. Families of children with ASD is described as living with autism, as the child requires intervention services for 20 to 40 hours per week. The first table shows my first child's weekly schedule after he was diagnosed with autistic disorder. That time I was a full-time graduate student, so I was able to get services for my son as much as possible. The second table shows a weekly schedule of my youngest child after he was diagnosed with a pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified at that time. Now it's under one category, autism spectrum disorder. I was a full-time classroom teacher at that time, so I could not have a time to get him individual speech or occupation therapy. But I had to work because he could get ABA service through my health plan. So families with a child with ASD are more likely to report financial problems, need additional income for the child care, reduce or stop work because of the child condition, and spend greater than 10 hours per week providing or coordinating care. So such families are often referred to as families living with ASD due to the associated lifelong implication. So given the impact that ASD has on the child and family, it is clear that there is a need that we have to pay attention to the entire family's needs when we provide the service to them. When children with the autism spectrum disorder start early intervention services, families who do not speak English at home experience more difficulties in seeking information on their child's dual language development. This is caused by limited access to available information and lack of common interest with other families who do not have children with autism spectrum disorder. Although research examining bilingualism in autism spectrum disorder is still in its infancy, the current body of research indicates that, young children with ASD are not considered different from monolingual children with ASD, and that bilingual environments even might promote communication and social skills of children with ASD. However, despite such a promising research, parents still, I'm sorry, I have to go back. However, despite such promising literature, studies on dual language development of children with autism spectrum disorder in the United States is still very limited. Parents of children with autism spectrum disorder are also found to hold a strong belief and positive attitude toward bilingualism. Unfortunately, many language minority parents have been reported to decide to give up the home language and speak only the majority language, for example, English in here. They seem to afraid that exposure to heritage language might compromise the intervention efficacy and the child English acquisition. In addition, professionals' advice on dual language development has not been consistent, which causing parents more anxiety and uncertainty on raising their child with autism spectrum disorder bilingually. Recently, more parents who are concerned about their children's developmental problems are seeking information on the internet. The internet can provide the parents an outlet for expressing and verifying their concerns regarding their children's developmental problems anonymously at any time and place. The internet is particularly important for CLD parents of children with the autism spectrum disorder, as they face uncertainty when making decisions on their child's dual language development. Now you see the website, we contact data, BC-US website, you can see beside the subheading, all the languages are written in Korean. The purpose of this study is to explore the narratives of Korean American immigrant mothers shared in online Korean community regarding dual language development. We are particularly interested in factors that might have influenced this mother's decision about their home language practices. We collected written recent messages posted in an online community, BCUSA.com, that has served Korean immigrant mothers who reside in the United States. In particular, we extracted messages from discussion forum dedicated to information needs for autism and developmental disabilities with those keywords in both Korean and English. There were 221 messages, mostly written in Korean. We conducted content analysis with the predetermined codes from previous studies. And then 148 messages were posted by mothers with children with autism spectrum disorder or having suspected autism spectrum symptoms. Out of 148 messages, 99 messages explicitly share their home language practices. So we conducted thematic analysis with the 99 messages and found two distinct groups of home language practices: Korean and bilingual groups and English only group. And we found the four main themes for Korean bilingual groups and three for English only speaking group. Dr. Young-Suk Hang will explain the main themes for Korean bilingual groups. And for English only speaking group, Dr. Young Kim will explain the themes as well as her own story.
Yes, I'm going to discuss the findings of Korean only speaking and bilingual groups. Four themes emerged from the messages around these two groups' home language practices. Number one, how professionals' advice influenced the mother's decision on the choice of their home language practice. Second, how professionals supported the mothers to maintain Korean or bilingual as their home language. Third, the strategies of maintaining dual languages. And fourth, the benefit of maintaining Korean or bilingual as their home language practice. Let's talk about first theme. Findings indicated professionals' advice played an important role when the mothers of both groups made a decision on their home language practice. For the Korean-only speaking group, professionals advised the mother to communicate with their child in Korean only, or at least both languages, Korean and English. For example, one message from the Korean-speaking group stated, since he started speech therapy at age 3, the speech therapist told me to speak Korean. A psychologist said, that's not a bad idea. Professionals' advice on home language practice for this group was Korean. Data indicated there were 47% of messages posted by the mothers who have continuously spoken Korean with their child after the child's diagnosis. The majority of this group indicated their English skills were limited. For the simultaneous bilingual group, like the findings of the Korean-speaking group, the data on the bilingual group also indicated professionals' advice influenced the mother's decision on their home language practice. For example, one message from the bilingual group stated, my child's therapist also encouraged me not to give up bilingualism. Now, my child is fully bilingual. Professionals' advice on home language practice for this group was dual languages, communicating with their child in both Korean and English. There were 13% of messages posted by the mothers who spoke both Korean and English with their child after the child's diagnosis. Most of the mothers in this group indicated their English proficiency as limited. A couple of mothers said they were fluent in English. Now, let's talk about second theme. Second theme emerged around professionals' support and encouragement for the mothers to maintain Korean or bilingual as their home language. Three different professionals' supports were addressed in this study. First, professionals shared the knowledge and information with the mothers of these two groups. They educated the mothers with important characteristics of autism spectrum disorder, such as communication skill, rather than focusing on language or vocabulary. For example, one message from the Korean speaking group stated, according to speech therapist, the reason my kid cannot communicate was due to the problems in attention or turn taking. So we focus on those areas. Just like this example, Professionals of support and education continue by sharing their benefit of becoming bilingual when the mothers expressed their concern on their children's delaying on language development. For example, one mother from bilingual group stated, "We were also so worried that we thought about switching to English, but the therapist told us that kids who learn two languages might look delayed, but later on, they will have a bigger vocabulary and eventually become bilinguals. Now my child is a sixth grader. He is fully bilingual in Korean as well as English." The professionals strongly supported toward bilingualism when mothers were concerned about the pace of their children's progress related to exposure to two languages. Professionals' encouragement for Korean-speaking group. The findings also describe the significant role of professionals' encouragement for this group in the mothers maintaining their primary language as home language when there were concerns on their child's slow progress in language development. For example, one mother from Korean-speaking group stated, "My child seems confused and was making very slow progress. But the therapist and the doctor insist on me speaking Korean, as he is mild and high functioning. Sometimes I feel frustrated, but I think it's up to mother's determination. I want to communicate in Korean, although it takes longer for him to fully communicate with me." Similar to findings with a Korean speaking group, professionals' knowledge and encouragement for the bilingual group have been instrumental in the mothers maintaining Korean and English with their child. The professionals shared information on dual language development and encouragement the mother to keep both languages when they expressed their child's language delay related to introducing to two languages. For example, one mother from bilingual speaking group stated, "According to the specialist, my child has been exposed to Korean since young. If we take Korean away because of language delay, then we take away the primary language from the child." After 6 months of using both languages, the child responded as alternatively to languages. "I thought English was the child's primary language, but the language the child has exposed to since young was also very important." Now, I'm going to talk about a third theme. Third theme describes several strategies the mother adopted for children's dual language development. There were three strategies. One, mothers and fathers in the bilingual group strategically alternated Korean and English for the dual language development of their children. For example, one message from the bilingual group stated, "The specialist said that she'll continue speaking Korean and mom should speak English." After 6 months of using both languages, the child responded to us alternating two languages. Second, some mothers use English as a communication tool for instruction and Korean for social interactions. For example, one message from the bilingual group stated, "I taught simple expression in English such as turn on, shoes on, let's go. Those expressions are easy and need repetitions, especially directions. My child learned Korean from Bororo Korean video clips. At first, there was a push from a speech therapist to unify English as the primary language. Now my kid is 40 months old and can respond in either Korean or English, depending on the speaker. I don't think bilingualism causes language delay. And now the therapist also agrees with me. So I'm using two languages." Third, for children's dual language development, some mothers maintain Korean as their home language practice, and professionals deliver their services in English. For example, one message from the bilingual group stated, "I have spoken Korean. His kindergarten teacher and therapist have spoken English to my child. Now I'm going to talk about a fourth theme. The fourth theme describes the benefit of mothers speaking Korean or two languages with their child. The findings address the importance of Korean-speaking mothers maintaining Korean so their children can grow as bilingual, fully understand and communicate with their mother in Korean, and make an emotional connection when they need. For example, one message from English-speaking group stated, now, he is a fourth grader. He is more struggling with emotional or social problems. For mom to support a kid in such situations, the kid needs to understand mom. Mom needs to fully communicate with the kid. The older the child, the more important mom's emotional support. Keep speaking Korean to your child so you can comfortably communicate. It just takes longer. Kids learn everything eventually. This mother portrayed the need of maintaining Korean as home language practice for Korean-speaking mothers, developing communication skills between mothers and children in Korean, so children's emotional and social problem can be properly addressed. So far, I discussed the findings of Korean-speaking and bilingual groups. Next, Dr. Kim will address the findings from English-only speaking group.
Hello. There is information from parents who spoke English only to their child as home language. Professionals strongly recommended mothers to communicate with their child in English at home. Mothers' English proficiency level is mostly limited, but a few stated they were fluent speakers in English. One parent who has a 9-year-old child with autism said, the speech therapist told me to speak English to my son who had difficulties with the language, although bilingualism is good. I think it was the right decision. In English, his language skill is at his age. The fact that I am a 1.5 generation without English difficulties seems to be helpful as well. Some parents were informed by professionals that they should speak only English to their child as a home language. They agreed with the professionals that English speaking only could support children with autism to be more responsive to the treatment of autism. Parents also believe that children with autism would develop their language, and the priority for the English-speaking group was their child's verbal language development. A mother with a 7-year-old boy with autism said, we had spoken Korean to our child until age 2 and found out that he did not learn any language. So after his autism diagnosis, we have spoken English 100%. Now his language has caught up with 100%. Now he goes to Korean school on Saturday morning. Another mother also said, in my experience, it is most important to make one primary language strong. At age 2, my child had early intervention services. Since then, we have spoken only English at home. Once the English language skills became solid, we introduced Korean to the child. On the other hand, other parents who spoke English only to their child by following professionals' advice regret now because the child would be disconnected from the family by only speaking English. One parent stated, my son is now 15 years old. My husband and I came to the United States when we were in our teens. Without any doubt, we spoke only English every day. Although his language has been improved more rapidly, I am now very regretful. In the case of high functioning, language comes along eventually. But once Korean language skill is lost, it is too hard to get it back. Now I ask my son to speak Korean, but he does not listen. Grandparents cannot communicate with him. Without communication, there are no emotional interactions. My mom watches my son, but whenever he gets hyper, she does not know what to do as she cannot understand him. If I could return to when he was diagnosed, I would insist on bilingualism. Another parent also stated, my child was able to communicate with a little bit in Korean when he was diagnosed at age 4. But the doctor and the speech therapist strongly advised to speak only English. Now he is 10 years old and only speaks in English, although he seems to understand his grandparents' Korean. As he is now communicative, I wish I had kept speaking Korean to him, even though he was confused. I am very regretful. Korean church plays a key role in the Korean community of the United States. Most everyone speaks Korean at church. Therefore, if they speak only English to their child, there would be a gap between the family and the church members. A parent talked about disconnectedness from Korean church. I speak only English to my child too, but in the Korean church, speaking only English gives a bad impression. They never know how much tears we had to shed until our kid can communicate at least in English. I'm rather considered as a lazy mom. I never talk about my kid's condition. Another parent stated, my son has autism and severe language impairment, so we only speak English to him. But people are so nosy. I didn't even bother to explain them, so I just avoid Korean people. Now, I would like to share my experience as an immigrant mother of a child with autism. I immigrated from Korea to the States when my son was 3 years old. My son was diagnosed with severe to moderate autism right before we moved. I was informed that my son needed to be spoken English only because of his language deficiency and the fact that the most of his environment would be English spoken. Obviously, my English was limited, but I followed the advice from the professional to speak English only to my son. Since I always spoke English to him, my son's Korean was not developed, and my church members asked why I did not speak Korean to him. I knew they were either curious or concerned, but their questions made me stressed since I kept explaining why, and also I was not sure what I did was right. I just trusted what professionals informed me. By the way, later, I found out that my son picked up some Korean words, even if I did not directly speak Korean to him. I was thinking this was because he picked some words from Korean church, and when I spoke Korean to my Korean friends and other family members. Since the time I began to speak Korean to him to see if he understood, then spoke English for the same content in case he did not understand Korean at first. Now I have a habit to speak Korean and English at the same time, which really helped him understand both the languages. This has been working effectively, especially when I express my emotion to him. As my experience says, I now want to encourage parents to maintain their mother language at home, even if the child is spoken English in other places. Also, I would like to say as an immigrant mom that I did not have sufficient resources to support my son who needed early intervention treatment for his autism. Because of language and cultural barriers, it was not easy to find the right resources in the beginning of my life here. However, my son luckily received a fair amount of therapy by the support of American mom who had a child with autism. My husband was taking care of my son as a house husband while I was working. I was also able to hire a lawyer who is specialized in special education to fight for proper services from school district for my son. Actually, when I moved from Las Vegas to California, I contacted Korean mothers with child of autism for service information. Surprisingly, nobody knew behavioral therapy, which is the core treatment of autism, whereas my son had been receiving it several years before. Now we have a few support groups with Korean mothers with a child of special needs. I'm very motivated to help other immigrant minorities with a child of special needs, as well as Korean mothers. Thank you.
So our findings show that how much Korean mothers respect and follow professionals' advice when they go make a decision about home language practice. It is interesting that professionals and practitioners provide complete information to these mothers. It is the families who live with children with the autism spectrum disorder. So practitioners must consider family-centered practice when they work with all families. Since the early 1980s, the concept of a family-centered practice has become the essential principle guiding the design and delivery of a service model in early intervention and early childhood special education. The theory of family-centeredness has 5 components, and recent studies show us that family-professional relationships has become the major component of family-centered practices. In 2014, Division of Early Childhood of the Council for Exceptional Children recommended practices for practitioners who work with the families of children in early intervention and early special education programs. Practitioners should treat the families with dignity and respect. Their practices should be individualized, flexible, and responsive to each family's unique circumstances. Practitioners should provide the family members complete and unbiased information to make an informed decision and involve family members in acting on choices to strengthen child, parent, and family functioning. So from our study, we suggest that children with the autism spectrum disorder should be allowed the same opportunity for bilingualism as their typically developing peers. Professionals should be more culturally responsive by encouraging parents to speak the language they are comfortable with. Practitioners should reach out the online communities serving CLD families to share or provide more updated studies or information on dual language development. Professionals may want to work with local communities, such as churches, to reestablish the perceptions of the community about children with autism spectrum disorder. So now our presentation is over. I'd like to take any questions from the audience.
When you talk about early intervention, what age are you talking about?
Okay, let me stop sharing the screen. Yes, so early intervention can be started as early as 18 months old. But in California, from birth to age 3, the services provided by regional center. But after age 3 to age 5, the services provided through school district. So we always consider from birth to age 5, any services provided those age children are considered as early intervention and early childhood special education. So I see there are questions.
In the chat box, if you like, we can read those for you guys.
Yes, please.
One, we have Dr. Bantula also pointed out, thank you, Phoebe and Young, for sharing your family with us. I wanted to echo that as well. I really like the personalized piece of it. That was really made it kind of real for us, right? Another question, do you believe it is difficult for immigrant mothers to get the support they need because of the language barrier?
Yes, I believe so. Very often we think language barriers, but mostly I have to say cultural barriers. Very often immigrant mothers, they don't know how to deal with the professionals, and they don't know how to advocate for themselves. We consider service providers as authorities. So we don't, most of the time, we don't even challenge them. What we found that from our data, which is not included in a presentation, mothers tend to empower each other through these online communities by sharing information, how to communicate with the professionals, how to write email. There are a lot of tactics they're sharing. So yes, there is a barrier, definitely, but not just because of language, but also because of the cultural factors.
Thank you. As a future educator, how can we help encourage home language development?
I think Dr. Huang might be able to answer this one, since she covered the Korean bilingual group.
I think language is a very complex process. It's not just vocabulary or language development, but it also carries cultures and identities, and especially when parents, the time their children get diagnosed, make sure you really have to speak out as a parent. Speak out, if they want really want to receive their intervention with their home language, because what we find out from research data, most of parents, Korean immigrant parents, they're very obedient, and they don't really, even though they love bilingual, they want to keep the bilingual as their home language, but they have a tendency to listen to service professionals. So when you really got advice, let's just say just keep one language, English only, they need to really they need to speak out. At the same time, as a teacher, we need, I think as a teacher, we can educate parents how important it is keep their mother language, because the language is not just language, especially for those who are comfortable with their first language other than English, to make a connection with their kids. Teaching their own mother language, first language, is very important. Taking away their first language, it is just like taking away their identity, and they will have problem of connection with their own family members and as well as community. So to get support from family and also community, keep also their identity, keep their first language is very important. So as a teacher, we can educate what does it mean, developing bilingual. There is some stigma on bilingualism. Learning two languages, it seems, cause delays. But we have to really, provide correct information. It's not really delaying. Actually, thinking about just number of vocabulary, learning two languages in one is already two. So actually, kids learning two language, double in terms of number of vocabularies. So at the end, kids gonna have a bigger vocabulary, even just look at the vocabulary perspectives. So we as a teacher, providing current research and encouraging continuously encouraging parents to practice their first language, even though there seems like delay in let's just say English language development, but you have to really comfort them, giving correct information. Later on, eventually, they will be bilingual with bigger vocabulary. Not only that, there will be a lot of benefit. They can get connected with family members and also communities, and most important things, their identity, who they are. Taking away first a language means taking away their identities.
Thank you. Dr. Pantula, do you want to read your statement in the chat?
No, I was just thanking for the presentation and for organizing this and sharing our daughter's experience when she was younger. She's still young. We had similar issues, not not with special education, but more in terms of dual language, and so she was shy to speak up. But I thought the Montessori school teaching and encouragement worked very well with her. So I was just thanking you for organizing this.
Thank you. Dr. Richardson also has a question in the chat. I thought I saw him. I can read it. His question is, do either speak to the child in the mother language while the child was in the womb? If so, did you find it beneficial to your child in speaking the mother tongue?
I think Dr. Kim, the young Kim, will be able to answer, or okay, I can share mine too. I read the Korean books when I was pregnant. But the thing is that, again, I was a graduate student when I was pregnant. I don't know, for my first child. Oh, I was a teacher at that time. So I was working. I don't think I talked to my child that much. I was just busy teaching, working. So obviously, I have to say he was more exposed to English, actually, now I'm thinking. And my youngest one, he was exposed to English more because I was talking to his older brother in English, right, at home. And then, and you're right, even though my first language is Korean, because the fact that my work, and I usually interact with the people around my neighborhood, they all speak English. So I think that they're more exposed to English. Now I'm thinking back.
I can also say one thing about my son. Well, when I was pregnant, I was in Korea, so I mainly heard Korean speaking, and I spoke Korean only. I'm not sure if he really got into Korean because he had been nonverbal until the age of 6 years. And then, however, I believe that, the baby and in the womb, they can observe anything from mom, not only for the speaking to the baby, but also any surroundings. Especially, I was playing the piano for my church when I was pregnant for the worship service. And then when I found out from my son is he is really good at rhythms. So that's probably he observed what I did when I was pregnant.
Yeah, I'd like to add it on to what Dr. Kim said. To the question to Dr. Richardson, I think so. And also research is said, within days after birth, newborns shows a preference for voices they have heard over voices they have not heard prenatally. So yes, it is important as a pregnant mom and father, continuously, to speak to the baby, and not only just language wise, but also music wise and education, a lot of different education.
Thank you. Dr. Beck asks if she says thank you for the presentation, the great presentation, and what would be your future research plan on this topic?
Three of us found that the data we have collected are very interesting. We went through thematic analysis, but we are finding more interesting themes. So we are trying to analyze the data more and then plan to publish, some part of our studies sooner. Interestingly, three of us are not qualitative researchers. All of us are very quantified researchers. So, so it's a kind of new field for us to explore. So we are learning about this procedure, but definitely data gave us good information, and hopefully we can actually move on to collecting the data from mothers, directly interviewing them, or we might have to do some follow-up. Those who have older children, what about their real language practice and what actually influence it? Because we are more like prefer quantified data. So we really want to measure what actually affected the mom's decision making.
Thank you. I found this topic quite fascinating. I know that Dr. Jim and I have talked about it before. From a counseling perspective, we talk about the issue of being connected to your culture, right? And what type of psychological concerns come about from being disconnected from your culture. From this topic, it seems it's not just the child that might stand to be disconnected from the culture, but also the parent as well. And that of course is concerning too.
Yes, thank you. Actually, that was the main focus of our presentation. So professionals should consider families, not just the child. Unfortunately, we only look at child outcome rather than the entire family functioning. But what we found that is that, this is the family who is going to leave the child, for the life. So we really have to look at each family's preference in what they want to continue in terms of, bilingualism, and then support their decision as professionals. So thank you so much for that, bring that up.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I had another thought, but it just ran out of my head. Oh, the other piece of it seems, because you guys are talking about the families and connecting and talking with the mothers, it seems like there's a big piece that's probably outside of your scope, but in the field in general, that discussion about cultural competencies with regards to the practitioners who are working with the families. We have one more comment in the comments in the chat section. Nadine, her comment is, as someone who's taught and spoke in 3 languages growing up, I now find it really hard to say or express my thoughts in English because I think in Spanish and I have a hard time translating my thoughts into English. I think that's a common issue, right? Because I know, again, from my background in counseling, it's difficult to work with folks in English when in counseling, right? Because emotions and feelings and those kind of things tend to be thought of in their home language, and being able to translate that for me has always been difficult for my clients who speak in whose native language is something else other than English. So that seems like universal.
For anyone, I just want to share my tip. I have the same issue. So, I mean, it's different because my Korean is very strong as primary language, and then I learn English as a second language. But nowadays, since I have lived long enough in United States, and then I get confused. So what I do is I use a Google Translator. So I type up English, what I was trying to say, and translate to Korean and look at the translation, and then whether or not it makes sense in Korean. And then I switch back and see how that Korean is translated in English, and kind of refining the meaning. So using Google Translator made me realize that oh, knowing two languages is my power. So I can actually use both language to refine what I'm trying to express. So technology definitely helped me and boost up my confidence in terms of trying to express my opinion in either English or Korean. Before, I really struggle, actually, yes.
I really agree with Nadine because I'm married to someone from Greece. So I'm not fluent in Greek, but Greek is my part of my life, especially when I talk about food. When I talk about certain, expression, I cannot think of any other languages. So I have to just use Greek because there's nothing replace, Greek with the same emotion, same expression, because, certain language really stick with culture and food and emotions. So just what Dr. Gemma Kim addressed, knowing, learning different languages, I think this is definitely benefit to my life because my emotion, my, I would say delivering my, thought is just expanded through, many different, uh, uh, many different experiences, even though limited, 3 languages. So yes, I definitely agree with Nadine. Thank you for your comments.
All right. Okay, so we are at the 2 o'clock hour. I wanted to thank everyone for coming. I wanted to thank our presenters for such a great presentation. I'm seeing that also in the comment sections. Thank you. From the attendees are also saying thank you for the great presentation. So thanks a lot, and we will be done for the afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for coming.